I'm here today with Adam Russell Taylor. Adam is president of Sojourners and author of a recent book titled A More Perfect Union, A New Vision for Building the Beloved Community. Adam also authored a chapter in How to Heal Our Divides, Volume 2, and the title of that chapter is A Curriculum for Politically Divided Congregations, which, as you might expect, is also the name of a corresponding program within Sojourners. You can follow Adam on Twitter at Rev Adam Taylor, and Sojourners can be found, of course, at sojo.net. So, Adam, thanks so much for joining us, and thanks so much for contributing to our book.
Thanks, Ryan. It's my pleasure.
So before we start talking about the new book, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, certainly. So I had the privilege of leading Sojourners. We are a Christian ecumenical organization that's committed to peace and justice. We've been doing this work for over now 50 years. And, for us, helping to inspire Christians and people of faith to put their faith into conscience or faith into action is just core to what Christian discipleship is all about, being a follower of Christ is all about. We have active campaigns on a range of issues, from trying to protect and strengthen our democracy to addressing our immigration crisis to racial justice and policing to economic justice and more. A lot of my background has been at this intersection of faith and politics. It's certainly been kind of my vocational sense of calling. I am ordained in the Progressive National Convention and the American Baptist Church, so I do kind of have that formal hat, but I've always felt that my real calling is to try to reinvigorate a commitment to justice within the church broadly, and that's been a particular passion. I grew up very much in the shadow of the civil rights movement. My mother's Black and my father's white, and they got married at a controversial moment in 1968, and really instilled in me the sense that not only is everyone made in the image of God, but that our diversity is a strength and not a weakness. And I've really kind of taken that to heart, and also taken to heart that my generation and other generations inherited the unfinished business of the civil rights struggle. And I think, a big part of that ongoing struggle is to try to ensure that dignity and justice for all is truly accessible to all, and that we can really put behind us so many of the ways in which kind of a hierarchy of human value has defined so much of our history. So that's a little bit about me.
Yeah, well, you've done wonderful work, Adam. I'm very respectful of it. I'm so glad that you're doing what you're doing. As I mentioned, you recently released a book that's titled A More Perfect Union, A New Vision for Building the Beloved Community. Can you tell us about, why that book came about and what you're trying to convey in it?
Absolutely. So in the lead up to the 2016 election, I became increasingly alarmed and kind of just feeling a sense of anguish about just how polarized our country had become. And in the book, I kind of talk about this version of toxic polarization. So Dr. King in 1968 came out with his final book, which was entitled Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And he was very prescient when he wrote that book. Really, it's a book I would highly recommend others to read. But I think that we are facing a similar challenge and choice today. So kind of my remix version of Dr. King's question is, where do we go from here? A form of toxic polarization that is seeped into our politics and is also seeped into the church, or building the beloved community. And I was particularly concerned because I felt like there was a fairly ahistorical dystopian narrative that was at play in the 2016 election, the kind of Make America Great Again mantra or narrative that was quite appealing. And unfortunately, underneath it, it was kind of appealing to and stoking a lot of white grievance and a lot of fear about the changing demographics in this country. And I've always believed in the importance and power of public narrative, and that you can't, replace one narrative without having a more inspiring and hopeful alternative. And so, the narrative or the moral vision that animated the civil rights movement is the narrative of the beloved community. It's what Dr. King and so many other leaders constantly pointed to as the North Star of that movement, that was characterized around a commitment to justice and equality, but also to agape love, to loving your enemies, to nonviolence. And so in this book, I really try to unpack and to kind of contemporize what the beloved community could mean for us today. And I really believe that it could be a moral vision capable of healing a lot of our divisions, closing a lot of the divisions in this country, and that could really kind of enable us to move much more strongly in the direction of forming a more perfect union. I'll just quickly say my remix version of what that looks like is to build a nation, a set of communities in this country where neither punishment nor privilege is viciously tied to race or to ethnicity or to ableness or to gender or to sexual orientation. It's really creating a nation where everyone is valued, everyone is respected, and where, again, our diversity is embraced as a strength and not a liability.
Isn't it kind of amazing that, everything you're saying is just plain common sense? You know what I mean? And it's the way that we've said the world should be since the beginning of this country, if not before, right? It's the way we've said that it should be, but it's not the way we've acted by any stretch of the imagination. But it's just kind of like inconceivable, quite frankly, that we would be so oriented against what you said. Again, to me, it's just common sense. There's no other way that it should be, right? I mean, anyway.
And yeah, you're right, and it's so grounded in our Christian faith, the values that Christ espoused, let alone demonstrated for us, really are in line with what I just described, and it's also aligned with the best of our constitutional values and our civic values as well. Now, clearly, those have often been undermined and not fully realized, but you're right. I mean, and that's why I just have so much hope that it really could be this galvanizing vision for the whole country. And I'm not naive. I don't expect every single American to fully kind of embrace it, but I do think the vast majority are hungry for that kind of positive vision.
Absolutely. Absolutely true. Couldn't agree more. So let's get into politically divided congregations. Again, Adam was kind enough to write a chapter in the How to Heal or Divide books about that. How did that program come into place?
Yeah, well, let me unpack a little bit what I mean by this term toxic polarization. So if you look at polling that's been done by Pew, but also by a polling firm called PRI, as well as others, what they've found, which is again really alarming, is that we have not been this divided politically as a country than since the height of the 1960s, and in some ways the form of division or the form of polarization that we're facing now is almost more dangerous because the majority of Americans now not only distrust and dislike each other, when I'm talking about, Republicans toward Democrats or liberals toward conservatives, but they actually now harbor a sense of contempt for the person of the other political persuasion. They want to defeat them rather than try to persuade them. And that kind of us versus them, zero-sum mentality is really poisonous for our politics. And I think we're kind of seeing this play out in lots of different ways. And of course, there are institutional, systemic reasons and forces within our political system that are helping to incentivize and drive a lot of that behavior and that thinking, including gerrymandered districts and other things. But what I started to become really worried about, not only about the political danger of that, but that, a lot of that was seeping over into our churches. So, you might be familiar with a Lifeway research survey in 2018 that found that 57% of Protestant churchgoers aged 18 to 49 agreed with the statement, "I prefer to attend to a church where people share my political views." So there's been this kind of sorting within the church itself where, a lot of churchgoers almost see it as a kind of requirement of faith to agree with someone's political perspective or ideology, right? And, there's been kind of an exodus of people leaving churches, both because of, I think, some of the hypocrisy that they see in the church, but also because of some of the intolerance they see in the church. And certainly that is not the example that Christ set for us, to love our enemies, to love the other, to want to, be this example of living out the fruits of the Spirit in the world. And so we decided as Sojourners that we would try in a humble way to create a curriculum that directly addressed this challenge head on and really tried to provide some tools and some resources for pastors and church leaders so that they could, be a force for healing and bridge building within their church, but to do it in a way that then tried to lead their church in a direction of a greater commitment to justice and to anti-racism. And so, the curriculum does have this kind of direction to it, but it also acknowledges that there's going to be a lot of different opinions about how we can best move in that direction. And so, the initial kind of text that for me inspired this curriculum was Paul's letter to the church at Corinth. And, 1 Corinthians chapter 12, where, the Apostle Paul is talking to a extremely divided church in a very wealthy city that was known for vice. Literally, Corinth was kind of a byword for vice. And in Corinth, you have all of these house churches that were led by, different charismatic personalities that were bickering over doctrine. And, you just had a church that was filled with a lot of vitriol. And I think there's a lot of, parallels between that church and the church that we're seeing today. And the Apostle Paul kind of prescribes medicine to that church through one of the most powerful metaphors in all of Scripture, where he compares the church and the health of the church to the health of the human body. And, describes how if one part of that body is suffering, then the whole body suffers. And if one part rejoices, all parts rejoice with it. He also talks about how the weakest parts of the body are the most indispensable, and that as a church, we have to show equal concern for one another. And so that's one of the starting points in this curriculum. We really try to emphasize that we've got to name and unmask some of the forces that are driving some of the division in our churches. And instead of ignoring it and putting our head in the sand, we have got to find ways to create space for more civil, constructive dialogue about some of those divisions, and to be able to try to center our shared values rooted in Christ that I think could provide the roadmap out of some of those divisions. And again, this isn't, to kind of create this kind of superficial kumbaya mentality. It's to create a kind of more resilient unity that is rooted in a shared commitment to following Christ and modeling those same values. And then, of course, to have more tolerance for some of our political disagreements, but those shouldn't define us. Those shouldn't supersede our commitment to our shared faith. And sometimes I feel like, unfortunately, too many Christians are, almost overly politicizing faith, but kind of putting their politics ahead of their shared faith. And so that was the impetus behind this.
Wow. So how is the program structure? What are some of the key elements of it?
Yeah, so there's 8 sessions. And again, there's a lot of flexibility for church leaders to adapt the curriculum in different ways to their congregation. But the goal is that either small groups within your congregation, or if you're a smaller congregation, your whole congregation would be able to go through this program. And you would, kind of go through a set of discussions that are very much designed to kind of walk you through both how do we model a kind of dialogue that, again, is more Christ-like, and how can we learn from our faith about how to, better understand some of our differences, but also better understand and identify where we have common ground. And so, the curriculum is very much, rooted in scriptures, as I said before. I'll just give you a sense of a couple of the sessions. One, really starts with, what does our common identity in Christ really look like? What does that mean? And then how does that call us into the world to model that commitment? We have a session that's really focused on reconciliation, and how reconciliation does involve a commitment to truth-telling and to repentance. And we've got a session that looks at the crisis in the church and does provide some data to help people better understand kind of where the church is and what needs to be done. We have a final session that's focused on surfacing our shared dreams for our community. We ask people to literally think about, what is God's vision for our community and for our nation? And, they do some work with, building a mural of those dreams. And what's interesting is people realize often that they have a lot more shared sense of dream than they would, realize before they do the exercise. So those are just a few, but I think it's important that everything that is done in this curriculum has to be grounded in a shared commitment to deeper listening, to coming in with an open mind, to being curious, to not impugn the motives of others. We have a whole series of ground rules as well that are pretty important.
Well, those principles, those ground rules are things that I've heard repeated throughout, this entire How to Heal Our Divides effort. Everyone that I talk to, points to the same things that you just mentioned. I think it's incredibly important. But, pastors have always had a really difficult job. And my perception is over the last couple of years, that job has nothing but been more difficult. And, that set of vocation areas has not been immune from the Great Resignation, right? So, and the kinds of things that we're talking about here are not easy things to do, not easy things to discuss. So, how have you seen people be able to implement the program and adopt these things in the midst of all of the challenge and turmoil that they've been going through?
Yeah, no, you're right, Brian. It's not easy at all. And, and I also think that, some pastors have been fairly risk averse. I understand some of the reasons and
Absolutely.
motivations why, but, it's almost like the approach or the solution to how divided our politics are is to kind of step away and try to create an apolitical space within church. The challenge is that, being a follower of Christ has profound economic, political, and social implications. And of course, even more profound religious, spiritual implications, right? But those are all interconnected. And so, I don't think it's a choice for Christians not to find ways to put their faith in action in the public sphere. But the question is, how do we do it? And how do we, try to model a way of doing it that, doesn't repeat or model some of the mistakes that I think are happening within kind of the secular side of our politics. One of the things we realize is that, a lot of these church pastors feel very disconnected and isolated. And so we've been trying to find ways to connect them to one another, certainly to build relationship, but also to feel a sense of solidarity. We realize that like just putting out a curriculum, as well written as I hope it is, isn't enough. You've got to also provide additional training and coaching sessions. So haven't quite initiated that, but we have plans right now
Good.
to do more of that. And just to kind of walk alongside these pastors, because one, we can learn from their experience, but we can also, try to be a system of support and encouragement to them as they face different obstacles and as they, try to adapt in real time based on how the curriculum is being received within their church. I'll just say this, though, this kind of ties into my comment about risk aversion. I mean, I really think this is a time when the church has to be more courageous. And, I know that has some risk attached to it, but there's also, I would say, even greater risk in the church losing its light and its salt. And,
Exactly.
if we just kind of sit on our hands, we are essentially ceding this role to, other forces and other parts of our politics and society that I think are really, by and large, failing. And so, if we can't figure out a way to model what it looks like to build beloved community where different opinions can be respected and you can share a commitment to try to move in the direction of justice, then, I really worry about the fate of the church and the church's witness in the future. So this is at least one opportunity, one offering that I think can help the church. But I'm grateful there's so many others that are also outlined in this forthcoming book that we're a part of. And, I think we need to have a lot of different flowers blooming out there within the church and try to scale up what can work best.
It is such a grassroots requirement, right? I mean, none of us can solve this alone. It's got to be done, across each congregation, each community, what have you. And so, I mean, which is part of what makes it difficult. But part of the reason for doing the How to Heal Our Divides book is to, number one, provide hope to people, to let them see all these good things that are going on. And number two, to try to overcome some of the fragmentation. I mean, most of us don't know what else is going on across, the country, across the world. So anyway, so um, looking forward, I mean, is Sojourners got planned to make any extensions to the curriculum or the program, or invent other similar programs, or what's kind of new on the horizon from a Sojourners perspective?
Yeah, so I mean, a couple things. I mean, we're excited that we're bringing on a church coordinator that's going to provide a little bit more capacity on our end to follow up and to do some of the coaching that I described. I would love to design a little bit more of a kind of interactive multimedia set of tools, probably because I think that would help us reach a younger generation of folks that, just have a hard time sometimes reading, a document and then being inspired by it. No offense to all of us that still write books. But, and then, I think, as I've alluded to, we really are trying to weave together a network of churches that are kind of walking this road together on this journey. And, we're still figuring out the best ways to do that. We, have a kind of loose network of churches that are committed to faith and justice. And so we really want to build more of that infrastructure and a stronger connection point across churches. And then lastly, we are trying to work with some denominations and see if we can partner in ways where they could adapt the curriculum for their own purposes. I mean, we really are not proprietary about this. We want to see this curriculum used as much as possible. And, if it could be, adapted in ways that work better in a different context, we're certainly open to that.
That's excellent. Glad to hear all of that, and glad to support it however we can, to help get the word out. So what about, on your personal side, from a authorship perspective, do you have any plans at least that you can talk about regarding new books?
I am still kind of in this, discernment around how to, kind of get the word out even further about my existing book, probably because, things, I don't know if other authors have shared this with you, but no, I really see launching a book in the midst of COVID, it's certainly, tough and had its challenges.
Everyone tells me it's been really difficult.
Yeah. And, and the way that I look at it, and maybe this is like me trying to find the silver lining in it, is that I think it means that, the kind of old wineskin of, you really kind of make your biggest impact in the first couple of months is retired.
Yeah, no.
This is more of a marathon than a sprint. Let me put it that way. So for me, like, I'm grateful for the mostly virtual events that we did with podcasts, including your own, but also, some speaking events that were virtual. I did a little bit of in-person events in the fall. And then now things are really ramping up, and I'm excited that I'll be doing a kind of set of events. It's not a traditional book tour, but I'm trying to hit about 7 or 8 cities in the summer and fall where we're doing what are called beloved community immersion events, where we'll do kind of a deeper training with civic and church leaders. And then we'll do a kind of public event, hopefully drawing together pretty diverse audiences to discuss together, like, how does the beloved community vision resonate with them? How is the beloved community already being built? And then what do we need to do to catalyze that growth of the beloved community in whatever city we're in? And so, we've got plans to go to Memphis and Atlanta and a handful of other places, and we're adding more every week. So that's the thing I'm really excited about on the horizon. And I think, probably by the end of that, I will be in a better space spiritually and otherwise to kind of think about what a next book could be, but not there yet.
Totally understandable. But do also keep me posted with regard to that tour, so I can help get the word out about, those events as well. And, for what it's worth, I agree with you in terms of, important books have got long tails, right? Whereas I think books that are more celebrity based maybe are a flash in the pan, and more dependent upon the first 3 months or whatever of book sales. But I think books that are of substance and depth and have more longer appeal. So hopefully that'll be the case with your book as well.
Yeah, no, that's certainly my hope and prayer.
So again, the title of Adam's chapter is A Curriculum for Politically Divided Congregations. You can follow Adam on Twitter at Rev Adam Taylor, and you can learn more about the Sojourners program at sojo.net, sojo.net. So Adam, thank you very much again for contributing to this, and thanks so much for all the wonderful work that you and Sojourners are doing.
Thank you, Brian.